around neck. Take a moment to be together. Even just like with our eyes open. For those of you who don't know me, I think you're mostly all familiar faces, but I'm Rosie Fan. I'm an astrologer. I've been doing talks and teaching since 1996. And for 17 years, I gave a talk with Carol Trasado, and I just kind of want to take a moment, bring her energy and her heart into the space, because we know she's with us. And yeah, we know she'd be happy to be here today. And she is. And in case you're like not tuned in, she is a very vocal spirit. I can see that you have been talking to her. So her wisdom is still available, and yeah, take a moment. I want to also take a moment to tell you I just finished teaching a course and have this amazing group of people that are putting themselves out as astrologers. Sherry, I'm sorry, you're just, and Shanna and Karen and let's see who else here. So, and we'll be starting this astrology collective together, which we need to do more talks, and so then we'll be doing talks, and so you'll be getting more emails from me. Just so you know, there was like a quiet time for a couple of years where I didn't promote anything, and now you'll be getting more. So get off my mailing list now if you don't want emails. And then I've been working on a book for a long time, and I found a publisher this year for it, Revelor Press. And it's a really magical story, so I'm just gonna tell you. We met at the astrology conference in Seattle in May, and she and Jen Zart and I we really connected, and she agreed to publish it. And it turns out that she had just moved to Olympia, to Tumwater, several years ago, and she has bought the books from Kepler College and from other astrologers. So she's established an astrological library in Tumwater. That's one of the biggest collection of astrology books on the planet. Is right here, like 2 doors down from Heart of Wellness. And you can become a member to that. It's CAELI, Kaylee. CAELI, and you can look up her name, Jen Zart, 2 N's with in Jen, and ZAHRT. I thought maybe she'd make it tonight, but so she's got her publishing company, and her publishing part of her company is in the library, and the building and the place where she's doing all her work is a place where I used to get massage from Marta Glenn for years. And it's like her desk is in the exact place with a massage table. So she's come into town, she's publishing it, it'll probably be out in the next 2 months. And thank you. And I will look forward to be announcing that, and we'll have a party and celebrating that when that comes out. It's called Persephone's Revolution. And it's all the stuff I've been talking about for years. So. All right, and is there anything else anybody wants to announce? Share. Sherry?
Hi. So I have brought birds here that are for a project called Birds for Gaza. I have a link to Facebook along with their personal intentions. I would move.
Thank you, Sherry. All right, let's dive in. So, first of all, one of the things that's happened in the 4 years since I've done this talk live is that astrology seems to have exploded onto the scene. And there's a lot of astrologers and a lot of people talking about Pluto going into Aquarius. And that's very exciting. And I think we've felt the shift. It just happened a couple of days ago, June 20th. And every time a planet moves into Aquarius, it's another kind of urge, another kind of push us into this Aquarian age, into this time where there's more collaboration, more sharing, more a sense of awakening, moving us out of the Piscean age. And the Piscean age is this age that's been for the last 2,000 years. And it has to, these ages come about because of the Earth tilt and what part of the sky we're looking at and on the equinoxes and the solstices. So right now on the equinox, we look at the part of the sky that's the around 23 degrees Pisces. So we're moving towards the Aquarian age, and there's a lot of things that are going along with this in terms of our consciousness awakening. And I know it seems like that's not happening. And a lot of people are talking about war and these terrible tragedies and collapse that are happening. And I'm not going to say that those things aren't happening or that they're not coming. But I want to focus and ground us into there are bigger, longer cycles than the ones we're seeing than just Pluto moving into Aquarius or Neptune moving into Aries or Uranus moving into Gemini, which we're going to talk about today. But this alignment that's happening around the galactic center and the precession of the equinoxes and moving into the Aquarian age, these are big, long-term 26,000 year cycles. And there's a shift that happens that's happening according to this change that has to do with us moving out of the sixth ray, which is the Piscean ray of devotion, where we give up ourselves, where we become more fanatical, where we are devoted to gurus, teachers. And there's a sense of sacrifice that goes along with that. And the Aquarian age is the seventh ray, which is much more about collaborating, working together. And we can see these collaborations coming, and we can see the end of these hierarchical pyramid kind of structures where you have someone at the top and a bunch of people at the bottom, or we give up our power to a God, a person, a leader, a ruler. And so this time is shifting. And one of the things that I've been tracking is Pluto as it moves through the precession, as it moves through declination. And because in relationship to the Earth tilt, Pluto's only going into this extreme place of declination one more time. And the extreme place or out of bounds is when a planet exhibits its worst behavior or its most eccentric or its most out there behavior. And Pluto does this twice every 248 years. And so again, this is a smaller cycle than the big 26,000 year awakening into the seventh ray. But Pluto's orbit and the way it's aligned with our planet means that this next time period between 2025 and 2035 is the last time Pluto will go into extreme or go out of bounds for thousands of years. And this really marks the ending of a time of violence. Now we've got to get through these next 10 years. And we have to, and there's a way to work through these next 10 years that can be about presencing a different kind of revolution, a different kind of change than we've had in the past. So this Pluto cycle that we're in begins with the time of visionaries, which was the 1860s. Pluto goes 0 degrees declination, and then it goes into extreme declination in the power time, which is the 1940s. That's World War II. And then we have a rectification time in the 1980s, the fall of the Soviet Union. And then we have a time where we're moving into a reform, a revolution. And the reform and the revolution that's coming 2025 to 2035 is rectifying the imbalances of the abuse that happened in the 1940s. So it's a different kind of extreme behavior of Pluto. The extreme behavior of Pluto of the 1940s corresponds to a time of dictators and tyrants and tyranny. And certainly we saw that. We just say the names of these people and we can feel the tyranny. If we go back, we have the time of Louis XIV, we could go back to Augustus Caesar lived during that time period. We have the names that give your spine chilling, like Count Vlad and just really kind of take with Pilisar, you know, who he is, or Darius the Great, the great like conquerors. But what we're moving into is the time of revolution and the time when there's been the Reformation or the French and American revolutions was the last time. And we had the last crusade happen in 1291. And so we have this is what we're moving towards. And there's a synchronicity around what some of the other planets are doing that I really want to bring in. So Pluto's going out of bounds 2025. That's not this year, next year. And all of us, 2024, we have a little bit of a heads up. We get to prepare. We get to kind of really take care of ourselves this year. This is a year for really nurturing our well-being, for getting grounded. It's a good time to make moves. I don't think there's going to be any cataclysmic events this year astrologically. There's nothing that's happening, except for we'll talk about April, that's really taking everything down until we get to after the election. So my sense is that the powers that be have their finger in the dike until November. And there's a sense of everything going to appear okay. And business as usual. And we'll have two people running for president that are business as usual. They've both been president. It's going to be like, okay, what are we doing? We're still in the same game. And that is this year. It's the year right before things really start to change. One of the metaphors that was really coming to me is the metaphor of using Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. How many of you are like familiar with Beethoven's Ninth? Okay. So it's probably the greatest work of music ever written. And it's a 4-part symphony. And it begins, and I'm going to mirror this with beginning this cycle in the 1860s. So it begins, the symphony begins, first of all, it sounds like they're tuning up right in the beginning. You're like, okay, Beethoven's death, he sucks. You have the first couple of bars and you're like, what is this? And then all of a sudden, boom, the whole orchestra comes into unity. And what happened in the 1860s was all over the world, there was civil war everywhere. There was civil war in the US, 1860s. There was the Taiping Rebellion in China. There was civil war in Germany, in Italy. There was revolts in Russia. And then all of a sudden, right around late 1860s, all of these countries come into unification. In fact, it's called the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy. China unified at that time period, and the US ended its civil war and began a new country, I think, right around the end of the Civil War. So we have the beginning, and the first movement is this kind of building and this, like almost introducing this, like something has to change. And throughout that time period, the next 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, we have all these inventions. We have Edison and Tesla, we start having cars and planes in a very rapid period of time. We have this excelling of technology that's beginning. And part of it had to do with the very first thing that happened at the Vision time in 1863, 64. In that time period was James Clerk Maxwell wrote the equations for electricity and magnetism. And those are the equations that all of our technology is based on. Einstein would have nothing without those equations, so we have that. We get to the second movement, and the second movement is a little more intense. It's faster, it's moving faster, and then we get into the world wars. We get into World War I, we get into the Depression, World War II. And one of the things I think about with, there's a theory that in hindsight, centuries from now, when they write the history of this time, they'll call it the Long War that started in 1917 with the French, with the Russian Revolution and World War I. And it ended in with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, 1991, in that time period. And so we have the second movement that's holding this kind of energetic time period of change. And then we get to the 1980s, and we have this time period where things start falling apart. There's chinks in things. We've had Nixon, and we've kind of been, now we're doubting all the empirical attitudes. We're starting to have this sense that something's really kind of wrong with our society. We don't really know what to do with it. We're not really getting clear about how to motivate with it. This is like that third movement. It's very sweet and lyrical, but you kind of get the feeling like you're waiting for something. Because one of the things that's happening in the symphony is that the choir is, and sometimes they're sitting, but if you really kind of watch one of the symphonies, the choir's standing there silent for the whole first 3.5 movements. And you kind of get the sense that there's something in the background that's happening, and you're waiting for it to happen, because there's all these people on stage, like half the people are on stage aren't doing anything. So you have this sense that the orchestra is playing, and it's doing kind of, sometimes making some very difficult gestures inside the second movement. And you feel like the third movement is like, wait, now we're moving into this lovely, sweet period of time, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, where we're all acting like it's all normal, like we can sustain all of this infrastructure, we can sustain all of this. I don't think that's me. Oh. I don't know who this is. So we have this sense of this weird lyrical time period where there's like a surrealness to it. And I think that's what we've been feeling for years. Like it's surreal, like what is going on? The choir is still standing up there, not doing anything. And we know they're presencing, they're witnessing, they're holding the energy for something else to happen. And we get to the fourth movement, and the fourth movement begins. And this is just a metaphor, so it's not an accurate depiction of anything. But, sometime 2001, we have kind of this 9/11 thing that kicks in. But I really think the fourth movement kicks in around 2017, when we start feeling like, oh man, this is crazy. And the first part of the fourth movement is very cacophonous. It's very like, what is going on? It's like having this phone that I don't know where it came from. I don't know who it is. I don't know how to turn it off. So we have this, like, thank you, Ray. So we have this moment where it feels like there's this cacophony, and Beethoven writes it for the cacophony, for the edge of it, for the difficult kind of sense of it at the time. And then there's this pause. It's really brief. And I think this year's that pause. Like when I look at all of these transits, I think they make so much sense going along with what Beethoven channeled in the 1820s. So he channeled it before this cycle, but it really became such a popular symphony in the 1860s. And so it's really kind of one of the presencing, holding works of art for our time. And interestingly, when the Berlin Wall came down, Leonard Bernstein performed the fourth movement of Beethoven's symphony, and it became the anthem for the European Union. And the thing is, there's this pause, and that's where I think we are right now, because we've been hearing all this cacophony, and we feel like there's all this edginess, and there's wars, and nothing's making sense. And yet, no, and they're still not singing. We're like, man, 3.5 movements into this Beethoven. What the heck? Are they just going to stand there the whole time and not sing? And then all of a sudden, the baritone comes in. And that's what I think 2025 is. All of a sudden, the singing starts. And it's a kind of shift that we can't even imagine right now. We can't even process. And the very first thing that the singer comes in and says in German, and I don't know the German translation, but he says, not these words, not these sounds, not these sounds. It's like somebody standing up and saying, okay, not this. We're done with this. We're done with this kind of agitation. We're done with the violence. We're done with not feeling in control or empowered. So the baritone comes in, not these words, let's bring in joy. And the whole next part of the symphony is about the choir dancing alongside the orchestra, and the orchestra is resistant at first. The orchestra doesn't get on board with the melody right away. It comes in as like a little bit of an edge to it, and then, but the choir keeps holding this like higher vibration. There's something better out there. There is joy, and the fact that this great work of choral work, it was one of the first times that chorus had been brought into a symphony. Again, like the whole thing, if you can imagine being there for the first time, there's a deaf guy, he's not even in tune with the orchestra, you don't even know what's happening, and all of a sudden the choir starts singing probably one of the most beautiful choral arrangements that's ever been written. And there's this edge, and once they start getting entrained with each other, with the choir and the orchestra kind of catches up. So the orchestra is kind of like us floundering around here. And yet we know this presence of this other way of being. We can be the singers, the singers can be the angelical presences or whatever we want to make this, but there is this other presence that starts in. And that's what I think, that's the way I look at the stars and the planets as they're moving into this next time period, because there's such a depth of synchronicity that's going on between them. So I've described Pluto a little bit. And most of you have been listening to me talk about it ad nauseum for like 20 years. So let's bring in another planet to this whole scene. Let's bring in Neptune. So Neptune is the farthest out planet that is like the large gaseous orb. After we get past Neptune, we go into the Kuiper Belt, and we go into all these strange terrestrial planets and icy planets. But there's these four large gaseous orbs, and Neptune's the farthest out, and it represents our spirituality, our connection to spirit, our ability to transcend. And Neptune's cycle is 161 years, and so it's about to hit 0 degrees Aries. And 0 degrees Aries, it will hit in 2025. It'll be there 2025 for a bit, and then fully in 2026. This marks astrologically a beginning of a new cycle. 0 degrees Aries is this Aries point. It's about our ability to connect to the world. So this is us, where it's felt like we've been traumatized and also like held back. If it's felt like we've been like struggling internally, struggling physically, emotionally, if it's felt like there's been this undertow, Neptune's at the last degrees of Pisces. Now, Neptune loves Pisces, but Neptune loves Pisces because it gets to be its most watery, just most flowy, but also it doesn't, it gets to just be in the background. I mean, there's something about Pisces where it is that kind of quiet choir sitting in the background. It's not the active energy of Aries, of beginning things, of starting things. And the very last degree, we think of, oh, it's 0 degrees Aries, that's cool. But what's even cooler is to think about, it's also 29 degrees, 30 minutes Pisces. So, and Neptune is about the planet of completions and endings. And when it's at 29 degrees, 30 minutes Pisces, it's at this major completion point. And we can feel almost the transcendence in that turning point. That's happening the exact same time period that Pluto's going out of bounds is one of the synchronicities. The other synchronicity is the way Pluto and Neptune cycle and trains with each other, is that Neptune gets around 3 times, every time 2 times for Pluto. So every time Neptune goes to 0 degrees Aries, it's doing it when Pluto is either out of bounds or at 0 degrees declination. We can go back thousands of years. And so Neptune's cycle, as it gets to that completion of 29 degrees Pisces, 0 degrees Aries, it's always presencing a very magical time in relationship to Pluto. This isn't about the sign or the degree, the longitude of Pluto. This is about Pluto declination, north and south. So we have these moments when Neptune, the last time it was at 0 degrees Aries was 1861. So that was the last time Pluto was at 0 degrees declination vision time. So we have this resonance of Neptune. Now, this time that Neptune goes exactly as it's going into 0 degrees Aries, Saturn is joining it. So Saturn is going to move into 0 degrees Aries at the exact same time. It's almost the same month. It's spring of 2025, and then again spring 2026. And so to have two planets crossing 0 degrees Aries, beginning a new zodiacal cycle, at the same time that Pluto's going out of bounds, now we've got a third level of synchronicity for this moment. And Saturn's like the structures, the order of things, our karma. And one of the things a lot of the channelers have been saying is that there's an expediting of the release of karma that's been happening over the last, probably since 1977, since Chiron was discovered. So there's been this kind of intensity about the work that we're having to do. It's difficult, it's trauma work, it's healing work. We're all having to kind of find new tools for healing. We're having to deal with ancestral trauma. So we're doing all of this clearing of our ancestors and all of the wars and the battles and the craziness that has been part of humanity since the time period of, since the Ganges River dried up. And we moved from a matriarchal society into more patriarchal societies. So we're dealing with some trauma that's way back then, and we're moving into this time where we're completing those traumas. And right as we're doing this, there's this synchronicity of Saturn, the planet of karma, 0 degrees Aries conjunct Neptune. That Saturn and Neptune, they conjunct, every, I don't know, I can't remember the Stoic cycle right now, but it's like probably about 30 to 40 years or so. It's not that common, but to have them conjunct at 0 degrees Aries, now we have to go back thousands of years. So, so there's a specialness to that presencing, again, same time period as Pluto goes out of bounds. Now we're going to add Uranus into the picture. Uranus is the planet that rules the seventh ray. It rules the Aquarian age. It's the planet that connects to Aquarius. It's the planet of awakening. And it's going to be conjunct the Pleiades during this time period as well. Now, the Pleiades are the star system that has been informing us, connecting us about how to live in community and how to really love each other on this planet. It's a star system that has a particular affinity for the plant life and for nature and for our ability to kind of love this planet. You'll see, and I just say this from doing thousands of readings, when I see Pleiades and I see a connection, I often see someone who just kind of loves nature, needs to be in it, wants community. There's so much information that's coming from those stars. And Uranus is the awakener. Now, it gets to 0 degrees Gemini at the Pleiades every 84 years. Again, not so earth-shattering that it's going there. But Uranus has also been entrained with Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, at Pluto going out of bounds at 0 degrees declination. So it's been doing this dance. It's 84 years, right? Neptune's 161. You can feel it's a little bit off. It's not exactly twice. But there is like this resonance where the last time Uranus was at 0 at the Pleiades was 1942. So right in the middle of World War II. So there's all this kind of new energy that came in. We had all the world order things that started at that time period. There was so much like new things that got created in that time period, and we can connect to Uranus and Aquarius and, I mean, Uranus and Gemini and Neptune and Aries, and it's the same exact dynamic, but back then Pluto is in extreme declination north, which is the time of tyranny. That's what begins. That's what Uranus was presencing. That's what Neptune was presencing at 0 degrees Aries. What they're both going to be presencing now is revolution, reform, awakening, change, paradigm shifts. So there's a shift, and let me just talk about some of the things that have happened in the upcoming time according to Pluto out of bounds to get kind of a little bit. So I mentioned the French and American Revolution. We know about those things. We know that there was something that happened in that time period that started a more collective democratic republic kind of government. We go back before that, we go to the Reformation. We have the time of Martin Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and people saying, you know, the Catholic Church is pretty darn corrupt. Let's start something else here. We still are spiritual, we're still aware, but we want to bring something else in. So there's a big kind of taking down of the power structures then. The time before, the final crusade. And 1291 is a really interesting year. This was the last time, that was Pluto in extreme, out of bounds south. 1291 is the last crusade, but a couple months later, this interesting country was formed called Switzerland, or the cantons of Swiss. And Switzerland still acknowledges 1291 as their birth date. And it's the beginning of the true direct democracy. And so there's some theories that some of the crusaders, Knights Templar and these crusaders, went up to Switzerland, and they also went to Portugal, and they went up to Scotland, and they started forming these other kinds of societies. Whatever you want to think about them, you get to think. But there's something that was kind of also like an undertow, like, all right, we're not going to accept, being forced to fight ourselves or fight our brothers that are Muslim, or, we're going to start something different over here. We can all right, I'm already getting bored. Okay, so let's move on. You get the feeling like something that hasn't happened before, something like we're all looking at these leaders, and I don't even want to say their names. They're just these dudes that are up there trying to control everything. They're billionaires, and like, where's our power at? And where are the movements? Where are the voices? And how come we're not hearing them? We've heard a few of them. We've had some big demonstrations. We have Black Lives Matter. We have the women's movement. Those were years ago now. So what's going on? And I think it's this pause in the music. We're hearing the cacophony, but Neptune at the end of Pisces is like, whoa, can't motivate, can't just struggling to kind of stay here. It's a lot to stay alive at this time period. It's a lot to stay in our bodies. It's a lot to stay present when there's so much of that cacophony. And just go and listen to that first part of the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth, and just like hear the edge in it, because that's what it really feels like to me. So, so I've added Uranus in as this moving into the Pleiades, this awakening. So now let's add the eclipses in, and now we'll get to this year. So the eclipses are now Aries, Libra. And so again, we're presencing this Aries point. And we have some eclipses that are happening this year. March 25th, 5 degrees Libra, April 8th, 19 degrees Aries. And there's an interesting shift that's happening in during these eclipse times. Now, eclipses are kind of notorious for being times of ominous times, or times of destruction, or times of separation. But I think there are some eclipses that are like that, depending on what planets they're connected to, and there are some eclipses that just bring in a certain kind of magic to them. We've got the sun and the moon, and we're presencing this crazy, insane thing that our sun and the moon are the same size. And we're aligning with kind of this powerful moon and sun that is just part of the duality that we live in on this planet. And we have this moment with the eclipse where everything's lined up, Earth, sun, moon. And the planets that are connecting to it really matter. And on April 8th, it's exactly conjunct Chiron. And Chiron is this planet. It's visible a lot of the time. Sometimes it's a little bit invisible. It's very elongated orbit. And it was discovered in 1977, which was the beginning of a generation of people that are more aware of the body, mind, spirit connection. So those of us who are my age, older, we had to like do a lot of therapy, do a lot of meditation, but the younger generations, they kind of already have it in them. And that's part of that awareness that came in when Chiron was discovered. So when we have this eclipse conjunct Chiron, it's bringing in a crisis, because Chiron likes to do that. It says, you know, you got to pay attention, so let's bring in a crisis, but then it brings in the healing. And I think this is a very personal, kind of transformative time. In addition, Jupiter and Uranus are going to be conjunct at that time period around 22, 23 degrees Taurus. And 22, 23 degrees Taurus is one of my favorite stars. It could be my favorite star because my Venus is conjunct there, but it's the winking eye of Medusa. It's the divine feminine. It's this very powerful star. It's a bright star, and every 2.5 days it turns off, or I just get it wrong. So it either gets stronger for 9 hours or it gets brighter for 9 hours. I forget. But anyway, they call it the winking eye of Medusa because you can visibly see that the star is changing magnitude, and it's because it's an eclipsing binary. So this star is in the constellation of Perseus, who's holding Medusa's head, and it's her eye which turns men to stone. And the whole mythology of Medusa is the feminine kind of denigrated, the feminine pushed down, the feminine tortured, beheaded, killed, snakes of hair. It's like all this dark kind of quality to it. But Medusa stays empowered through all of it. And I think we're rewriting these ancient myths that have been so denigrating to the feminine. We're rewriting the myths of Persephone and the myths of Vesta and Juno. And we're really kind of looking at redefining how we work and collaborate together, and how instead of this hierarchy, this kind of way that let's go fight a war to solve a problem like that has ever done anything. That kind of energy, and it's the divine feminine. It doesn't have anything to do with men, women. It has to do with the divine feminine within all of us, and acknowledging that, allowing us to feel, allowing us to have emotions, allowing us to receive, allowing us to perceive. So when this conjunction happens, Jupiter and Uranus are both, they're like waking up Medusa. And this is powerful energy. And I think there could be another movement that kicks in. There could be something that starts at this moment, because waking up Medusa is no joke. And you have Uranus there, which is the awakener, and you have Jupiter that expands whatever anyone else is doing. Jupiter is the planet that comes in and says, oh, you want that? I'll just make it 10 times bigger than whatever you're thinking you want. And then I'll get out of the way and let you deal with it. So Jupiter's like kind of waking up and conjunct right at this star during an eclipse. So, and this eclipse is Chiron, which is the healing. So this is a powerful time of healing the divine feminine and the denigration and the issues we've had in our society with this. And so I think there's going to be some kind of shift at that time period. We go into the summer, and Pluto will stay in Aquarius for a while. So it's Pluto in Aquarius, it's giving us a chance to tap in if you're paying attention. So it'll get bigger and bigger energetically, particularly when it goes out of bounds in 2025. But right now, it's giving us a chance to feel into it. So notice what wants to change in you. Notice what things are getting easier for you just since January 20th. Notice what kind of things have been blocked while Pluto was in Capricorn since 2008. And then we have this eclipse that's kind of helping us presence Aquarius energy, Pluto in Aquarius. I'm sorry, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, because Uranus is the planet that rules Aquarius, it's kind of bringing us that energy. And we have Chiron at the eclipse in Aries, around 18, 19 degrees Aries, if you're tracking your charts. Then we go into May, and everything kind of gets normal again. There's no big transits from May until November. And there's a sense of being able to kind of hold on to the normal thing. Now, if we're paying attention, we can use this energy to move forward with the things we want to do in our life. If you want to move, change jobs. I know a number of people are feeling it's time to retire. It's time to, we can do that without it being part of a crisis, without it being pushed. Now, sometimes the push and the efforting and all the craziness that's coming will help us. But if you're tuned in, this summer is a very good time. It's a good time to get married. It's a good time to make commitments, buy, sell, do stuff. And then we get to the election. And Mars goes retrograde a couple of weeks after the election. And Mars retrogrades, they happen every other year. Again, don't let people tell you this is like the massive worst thing that's ever going to happen to us. It's not. It is opposite Pluto, so it's not easy. And it will be retrograde all through the winter. So I am encouraging people to think about where you want to be for the winter and just get there and be there and hang out wherever you want to be for the winter. And try and make the transition in October or even September. Even though those are eclipse times as well. It'll just be nice, I think, to have your winter kind of figured out. Because Mars is like a pain in the ass. It's like it triggers things and it just wants everybody to get agitated, and there'll be just like levels of agitation. And when people are more agitated, they just don't, they're just not on their best behavior. And Mars just, he's like, and I'm thinking of my brother who's just like a total instigator. He can stay very calm, but he'll say the exact thing that will make you enraged. And that's Mars. So he's gonna, like, there's gonna be a lot of pissed off people after the election. And we know that anyway, because one side's gonna be pissed off. You know, we don't know exactly which side, and I don't know that I'm gonna go there today, but but somebody's gonna be pissed off in this time period. And there's a heat to it. So I am concerned about climate change and any kind of heat that happens in the southern hemisphere during that time. It could be a warmer winter in general. It could be just a little more intense for those months. And it's kind of like Mars is saying, something's coming, pay attention. And so we have this year where nobody's, you know, we've got this little time in April, which we could blow off. We could just, you know, go somewhere, forget about the world and stay off news and just, and that may be a perfect thing to do during that time. Because whatever gets started in that time period isn't going to take off yet. It'll just, it'll look like something amazing is going to happen. And then we get to May and it's like, oh, business as usual. You know, we're dealing with these guys again, or we're dealing with this thing again. So we get to, we get to that Mars starts pushing us and nudging us. There's something else here. And it can be a lot of fear energy. But the thing is that the big transformative energies aren't there yet. We're still in Neptune and Pisces. We're still Uranus and Taurus. We're still, Pluto's not out of balance yet. So when those big transits happen in 2025, they announce themselves, and then they're not fully engaged until 2026. So we have some time, and there's a sense that even Pluto, when it's going into extreme declination, it only does it for part of the year. So it's not even going into extreme declination for the entire year every year. It's just going in for the second half of the year. So we have the spring where Pluto won't be out of bounds, and then we've got the fall and the winter where Pluto will be out of bounds. So even in the future, Pluto's still not even going to go out of bounds and do all of that diabolical stuff it's done in the past. It's going to give us these chances to course correct. And I want to bring this in because I feel like there can be this sense of doom and gloom, and there can be this sense of, if you're not where you're supposed to be, you better get there now. And I'm thinking, no, it's going to be like contractions. You know, there's going to be the pause moments. There's going to be this moment where you go to the bathroom and you can relax for a minute, close your eyes, rest, figure out some things, and then there'll be another contraction. And as that's happening, Neptune in Aries, Uranus will move into Gemini, which will be activating. Then we get to 2027, 2028. Uranus into Gemini will be activating Orion's belt, and it will be clearing all this difficult karma of humanity. Orion is the hunter, the whole perpetrator, the whole hunter, victim, perpetrator kind of thinking that has really come into humanity, particularly in the last 3,000 years. I think Uranus will start helping us clear that. And then 2031, 2032, it starts like moving into this more egalitarian society, and we have these shifts. And it could be peace, it could be a whole different way of being, because man, the choir is singing and the orchestra is on board at that point in time. And there's a sense that there is a real opportunity for joy that just hasn't been there for all of these centuries and experiences, where people have been so downtrodden and so sense of oppression all over in different ways. And I think that there is really this sense that something could dramatically shift that we can't even imagine right at this moment in time. And it's not this year, and it's not last year, and it hasn't been happening yet. We'll see some of it in 2025, and then 2026, we really kind of see this more fully. So when you're going about this year, the eclipse will actually be visible in certain parts of the United States. So it'll be going through Western New York, and then it'll go down through Texas and the center of the country. So there is like something shifting in the US. I think wherever the eclipses are visible tends to activate that area a little more. So I think there can be an activation, and we'll be in a time of shifting. All right, questions so far? Yeah, Beth,
So this is.
can you stand up, please? And sorry.
So.
Thanks, Beth. So Beth was saying, for those of you on Zoom, that that you're feeling some lighter, like you're doing some clearing and some deep healing work, and you're a healer and an amazing healer in our community. And you're also bringing in this work around the octaves and planets shifting in the octave relationship between the planets. So I'll tell you what I understand about this. I don't know who the astrologer is you're referring to, but Particularly in esoteric astrology, they work with the octaves of the planets. And so Mercury is our mind and how we think, and Uranus is how we think about the big picture, our ability to expand our minds and have new ideas and be innovative. And so Mercury is the lower octave of Uranus. And Venus is the lower octave of Neptune. Venus is the planet of falling in love, and where we think we love the person, but we don't actually know them, and we're just falling in love with an illusion. And Neptune's the divine love, the love of true compassion, true empathy, true spiritual connection. So we have that, and then Pluto and Mars have an octave relationship, and Mars is the personal will, our ability to act and move forward with things and evolve personally. And Pluto is the planet of the larger evolution of humanity, and maybe even larger than that. And so when Mars, so these activations, particularly when Mercury and Uranus have a relationship, when they conjunct or oppose, or when Venus and Neptune have a relationship, these are moments when we're allowing the lower vibrations of the planet, that's the terrestrial inner planet, we're giving that planet a chance to be activated or infused with the higher vibration of the higher octave planet. So when we're looking at the Mars retrograde and it's standing still, and planets become most powerful when they're standing still. When they're just like standing there, just saying, I'm at 5 degrees Leo, and I am gonna mess with you. That's Mars standing there. And it's opposite Pluto. So while it's doing that, it is activating and bringing in the higher vibration of Pluto, which is, okay, that's fine if you want to behave like an idiot or do whatever, violent thing you want to do with Mars. But Pluto's there saying that it's got to be for the good of all. Pluto's got this voice here that says, I'm the god of the underworld and death, but it's got to be about our ability to evolve. Like we as a species have to be, and I'm not afraid of death, and I'm not afraid of you, Mars. I mean, bring it on. But this dynamic allows Mars to bring in the higher vibration of Pluto, because it will oppose Pluto 3 times in between October, November, all the way to March. So is this kind of like what you're saying, or no? There is, I think, also, when we think about the planets and our awareness and kind of consciousness on this planet, and using astrology as a mirror for consciousness, for thousands of years, there were seers who knew that there were invisible planets. The Vedic teachers, the Hindus, they knew that there were planets that were invisible, but they couldn't see them, name them. They didn't come into the consciousness of humanity. So whenever a planet is discovered, it's really presenting a new consciousness. And Uranus was discovered in the late 1700s. And we have this planet that all of a sudden we have a new planet, and all of a sudden we also have revolution, and we also have this new technology, like all the technologies that got started in the late 1700s, the Industrial Revolution kicking in. And we have also this new kind of awareness of something that's possible, that's beyond what's been exhibited in the late 1700s. We get to the late 1800s and Neptune's discovered. I think it was somewhere in the 1800s. And it was sometime around the time when a lot of spiritual teachers were speaking out. It was a lot of East meets West. We had Ramakrishna, we had the spiritualists, we had the Theosophists, Helena Blavatsky, and we had this kind of movement of understanding spirituality not from a religious perspective, like with the monotheistic religions where there is a devotion to a god in a way, but there's a sense of something else they're bringing in. And there's a sense of the mystery that they're bringing in, which is Neptune also. So then we get to 1920s, and that's when Pluto was discovered. And again, like we're like, World War I, we've got like, something has got to change on this planet, and we start having these power structures almost like announce themselves, like they've been there the whole time. And even, capitalism, as we're talking about this structure that is pretty corrupt at this point in time, not that it was corrupt in its essence. When Adam Smith talked about it, he was just talking about it as watch out for the monarchy, but we have these changes that Pluto's bringing in. So then we get to 1977 and we have Chiron, and Chiron's the wounded healer, our ability to heal. And now we have like this ability to heal, and now there's almost a sense of something starts like opening up. And then we get to the 2001, 2002, and we start discovering all these other planets. And the whole Kuiper belt starts like opening up to us. And the Kuiper belt is a strong force field. It has a particular slant. This is why Pluto is not going out of bounds anymore. It's because of this slant of the entire Kuiper belt. And as our Earth moves and tilts into an alignment with the Kuiper belt, it's presencing a whole, like, I think, like the veils becoming thinner, that sense of even the molecules moving farther apart, so that there's more space for us, more space to breathe and change and transform. And so these old ways and patterns that kind of hold us back, that are very contracting, that tell us, like this whole idea that I can determine your reality, or I can tell you what's real, or tell you what's not real, or just say, yeah, you're full of it. Like that whole kind of perspective is shifting. And as we move into more and more alignment with the entire Kuiper belt, we really open up to a different kind of reality that can exist here alongside some of these other realities. Like we figure out how to phase shift in a way that we can move into synchronicity without, we could be standing right next to somebody who's doing something, and we could be not entrained with them to the point where whatever they're doing, even what they're saying, doesn't activate us, doesn't even affect us. One of the things I think we do need to pay attention to is how much technology we're using right now, because this can be a little bit of an interference. Most of us are doing really healthy things for our bodies, and we're meditating, we're doing yoga, but we might want to like notice how the technology is affecting us. I think it's just about paying attention at this point in time. But there's a sense that that can be an interference, but there's a way that these new technologies, or they're not new, they've actually been around for a long time. Free energy devices, the whole work of Nikola Tesla and other scientists, Walter Russell is like a big fan of his. So who we're tuning into the kind of the magic of the way matter forms. And when we realize how matter forms, and we realize, right now we've got this very boxy periodic table of elements, and we have this construct of elements that's really not beautiful, not true in an essence where we feel it. So our whole way of working with chemistry, which is alchemy, is about control and domination. And there's a way to work with the elements and in a spiral. And Walter Russell's got this beautiful, he did this in the 1920s. He had an awakening experience, and he was like, whoa, the periodic table of elements looks like this. It's a spiral, and it's got octaves, and it's and it's got light rays, and this is how you can tell like what how planets are going to combine and what they're going to combine with. And instead of thinking of it as this element with this element is going to be CO2. He looked at it as these vibrational poles that were connecting. And when we think about how vibrational all of this is, there's so much possibility for us to change out of this paradigm, out of this idea of what reality is. And we add all of these transits that are coming to it that are going to support us emotionally and with our vibrations, at the same time that there's this great potential for us to start learning these new healing techniques, releasing our trauma, and at the same time kind of realizing that some things that have been very difficult can be very easy and instantaneous. So I think we have this year where we're it can look a lot like business as usual. Now, the portal in April, we'll see what happens then. I'm gonna be watching for that, and we'll see what happens then for us personally and what things get started then, because those things that get started, like if somebody starts a movement then and it starts taking off, and they're kind of aware that their movement is really for the future, then that'll be a really good sign to me. It'll be a good sign if someone starts something and says, but we're gonna really pull this out in 2025, or we're gonna really pull this out in 2026. That's a good sign. If somebody tries to get it all going in 2024, I don't think it will be as successful, and it may fail in a way that somebody might feel like discouraged. You know, it's never going to change, and then we get into that. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was curious about, you said, I got here a few minutes late, so maybe you spoke to this, but you talked about from 2025 to 2035, we're rectifying something from the 1940s. And I'm curious, like, to me, it feels like something got opened October 7th. And that I was a little like thrown off because I was like, something big is happening right now. Like this movement for Palestinian liberation took place where it is like kind of, I feel like a metaphor for conflict all over the planet is up, and it feels like it's unifying us towards what we're moving towards in 2026. So I'm curious if you can.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So Rebecca was bringing up feeling like something is happening, particularly since October 7th, and the shift that's happening in the Middle East with the Palestinians and the Israelis and what's going on in that part of the world. So oftentimes revolutions do start early, and it's a little bit, there's like a history of when revolutions start early, they're not successful right away. If they can hang in there with this, and if this can build momentum, it could be the very thing that's what's we're really seeing as a change, particularly because Jerusalem is such a powerful spot of such a powerful portal. That could be, we could be seeing this massive change in 2025. I'm just kind of, there's been some history of revolutions that start too early not being very successful.
When you mean too early to mean according to alignment?
Yeah, so before Pluto goes out of bounds. So when Pluto goes out of bounds, it really helps the revolutions be successful. It really helps the power to the people. Now, revolutions do start earlier, and then they bring in a lot of change. They always bring in change. It's just that the period of time, if they start right before Pluto goes out of bounds, then they look particularly bloody and horrific for a while. And so I think that's what we're seeing. And I'm not sure that the energy this year really helps that move out of that place. But when we get to 2025, yeah, I think that it could be, you know, we could see a complete shift in that area of the world.
Reason that this whole conflict, in my opinion, is happening is because really traumatized people move to a place and traumatized other people and didn't get to heal the 1940s.
Absolutely.
trauma.
And I think that, so 1948 was that year, but it was getting established during World War II, and there was so much trauma. And I just want to repeat for what you were saying is that really traumatized people were refugees from Europe, moving towards a place where there's already so much trauma. And then all these decisions are being made by people who are not traumatized, but are in this place of control and power, who are deciding, like the British government and the US government and these powers and the Soviet Union were deciding many different things at that time period, where the barrier between India and Pakistan, where there's so much trauma and disruption there, and the creation of Israel and all the boundaries around that and how it was done. And really it was the imperialistic state that really created all of this to begin with. And now there is this awakening that I think is happening that is about like, okay, this has to change. No longer can this be. And it's just almost like there's nothing left but to change it. Yeah, I mean, maybe the awakening of Medusa and that energy will be really supportive for a turning point there. But I think that I think it's interesting that the leadership, our leadership, is also part of this generation that is about to die, and is, they're in their late 80s, in their 80s. It's like there's all this energy that's about to just die off. And I think the energetics of 2025 helped that happen. I just don't think the energetics of 2024 helped that happen. And I'm just like kind of hoping that it's building, and that the energy is building rather than getting so frustrated that it just kind of collapses, because that has happened in past time periods of Pluto going out of bounds. That's what I'm kind of referring to. The main time I'm thinking about is the time of Justinian. So he was the Byzantine emperor, and there was all these riots, revolutions, right, that just kind of instantly erupted, almost just kind of like with the Hamas, just desperate, like something has to happen, and just kind of reaching out and with violence, but also that kind of desperation that was happening in the Byzantine Empire. And Justinian came in just like kind of a Netanyahu figure or a Trump figure or whatever kind of figure, and came in and started corralling, and had this very manipulative way of pushing all of the dissidents and the people who were rebelling into the Colosseum, and then slaughtered them all, just kind of like what we're seeing, this kind of genocide. And then when Pluto went out of bounds, like a year later, Justinian came in and said, okay, I can see that these revolutions aren't going away, and I have to change, and I'm going to change the infrastructure of the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire, and I'm going to create a system of just laws. And he came in and did a bunch of infrastructure work at that time. So he became a different emperor. And I think, so those revolts changed the whole course of the Byzantine Empire for hundreds of years after that, into a society that was, could function, that had infrastructure. We don't hear about the Byzantine Empire that much. It was the longest lasting empire, I think, in history. And close. Who did I leave out?
No,
The Shang dynasty or somebody. But there was something that almost they're not noticeable because they were in the background of so much. They had figured out some system of laws. And I'm not saying they were right, but so that's kind of what I'm watching for. Now, there's a note shifting in a way that I just think it's going to take the whole momentum of the year. And then at the end of this year, Mars opposing Pluto, and then us move Pluto going out of bounds in the spring of 2025. That could totally be the big game changer. And it could happen that quick. Again, it just like all of a sudden the baritone comes in. It's like, not this, not these, not this sound. Let's, and there's just this little pause that's right now. And it may even be a pause in the fighting over there, and they may even figure out a way to kind of pause the genocide for a second and make it look like, oh, it's gonna be okay, and everyone will go back to normal just for like a couple of months. And then we get to the fall and it's like, no, it's not, it's gotta change, we can't. This is not sustainable, this is not okay, this is not okay to commit such level of genocide and horror. And it's not okay in a bigger picture of the Middle East and how important this land has been and the people living in this land and what has happened in that very small part of the world, even just along Israel, Judea, the Palestinians, the Philistines, the Phoenicians, like how much of our society is kind of developed along there and how much of the roots that we need to transform are there. And so I think it's going to be interesting that time plate, because also going back to the Arab Spring, again, it was too soon. So it didn't like create the kind of change that we're about to see. It didn't like these governments moved back into authoritarian control or into chaos or ongoing civil war, like in Yemen, or like this kind of, it didn't crest. It was like a massive revolution for about 9 months. And then it just, because the energy just wasn't quite there. And what I'm saying is the energy is going to be there. It's not this year, but it's 2025. And if we're paying attention, it's now, because now if we're feeling it, we can align with this energy now. I mean, this is the way time works. It's not just, I don't want to hold it as like this linear kind of construct. We can take the future and bring it into the now. And there's ways to take the energetics, and you can do this personally by just looking at your own personal transits and going into 2025 and feeling what's 0 degrees Aries in your chart. How do you want to activate it now? Because this is just by knowing that this is possible, that we could take this energy of Jupiter and Uranus at Medusa. And also Jupiter is going to very quickly over the summer move through the Pleiades. And when Jupiter moves through the Pleiades, it's going to give us a doorway to the future, to Uranus moving into the Pleiades. So there's a lot of awareness and understanding that we can come to, a lot of wisdom. Jupiter can bring in wisdom. So it will be at the Pleiades this summer, and it will be, then it'll go through Orion, and then it will help be clearing. So there's a lot of magic that could be happening at this time period. I think in terms of the global consensus reality that we're working with, that's we're seeing change. We'll see whatever people dying and people losing control or coming out of power in 2025. But thanks for bringing that up. Because I think that's also going to happen in the US, because I think we're going to see the same old. Whatever this year will be, we'll have an election, same old, and then we'll get to this thing, and this time when Pluto goes retrograde right after the election, and then we're like, okay, no more of the same old. Something has got to change, and then we'll have 2025 where we'll start having this energy that will really illuminate us, wake us up, get us. It's kind of the energy that isn't there right now for us to get out on the streets. Like, people are doing it, but they're doing it at great cost to themselves. They're doing it, by leaving parts of themselves behind. What we get to do in 2025 is have the energy to take our whole selves into the picture, to stand in the street with our whole being, not just with, with a sense of, just deprivation that I think is coming with so many people who are activists right now. And I want to acknowledge that it's really difficult to do right now. And the people who are doing it at great cost to themselves. That, there's a great risk that's involved. There's not enough people that are doing it, and there's just not enough energy for it right now. And for those who are doing it, they're holding the space for this to continue, so that when this tipping point happens with all of these transits, it'll just be so much easier for us to just like get out of our pajamas and go down to the Capitol and say, hey, we're going to sing, and we're going to sing until we can sing no more. And we're just going to be like, ode to joining it. And like, we're not tolerating this anymore. We're not, we're going to get rid of these stupid guns. Why do we have them? And we're going to like change some of these underlying structures that are deteriorating our society. And a lot of it has to do with what we believe and the constructs, and those can change like just very quickly with something taking off. Thank you, Rebecca. Other thoughts, Christian?
You mentioned, I think, in eclipse March 25th. You didn't say anything about that.
Thank you. All right, so the eclipse on March 25th. It's not a total one, and it's lunar, so it's a little bit of a weaker energy. But for some of you, it'll be a powerful eclipse for you. So let me just find it in here. You said March 25th, thank you. 5 degrees Libra. So it's not hitting any big personal planets. So I'm not that like big concerned about it. We'll be leading into the April 8th eclipse, so Jupiter and Uranus will be getting closer at that time.
That sounds like there's a reason you didn't mention it.
It wasn't grabbing my attention. I mean, it is Aries, but it's 5 degrees, which is just far enough off of the 0 degrees point that doesn't feel like it's that active. I think March will be, I mean, I think we're in for February and March. I think we're in good months also to be, particularly February. This is a good month if you're making decisions, making plans, and making decisions, particularly as we can feel more into Pluto and Aquarius. And then the first eclipse, I think, will be kind of an introduction into the second eclipse and into kind of the healing energy that's coming. I mean, it could stir up the crisis, but it would be more related to the second eclipse. It would kind of, yeah, connect into that second eclipse. Thank you. Yeah.
Are you sure you don't want to talk about the election?
So Trump unfortunately has very good transits for winning. So don't be fooled by statistics and things right now. He's got Jupiter in his 10th house, and he's a Jupiterian person. Now that can mean all kinds of things for him. It could mean I mean, Jupiter can mess with us in different ways. It can make us feel like a king and then we're not. It can be a little bit of a game player, but it is good, and Biden's chart is not as good for the election. But I thought he wasn't going to make it this long. I thought he was going to be out 2 years ago. So both of them feel like they're cockroaches, like they're not dying, they're not going anywhere, and so they're defying the laws of astrology. I think it's not about them, and even their charts or even their relationship to the country, because I feel like it's so much more about us starting to realize that something has to change, and it has nothing to do with an election, or it doesn't have to do with the old structures. I think we have to get so tired of this old thing that we start realizing we can create something new and different. And it feels like that's this weary, like disgust, this like even horrifying of what's happening in Ukraine and all these places. I think Putin will be out. I think they're not going to be able to sustain this energy through Pluto out of bounds. And I think we're like in a place of almost stupefaction at this moment of, wow, this is almost like mind blowing that this is happening in this way. And so I think we have to I think we just have a little more to go before we're like ready to motivate ourselves in a way that is not the same old kind of revolution. It's not about getting the guns out and fighting. It's about singing and being in a non-violent way with each other. And that takes us a really different kind of energy than has ever happened, at least in the last 3,000 years. All of these other revolutions happened before Gandhi, before Ramakrishna, before these awakened masters really came here in this cycle in the 1860s. And so when those awakened masters started coming here saying, okay, there's a different way to make this change happen. And so those are the visionaries that are guiding us, the leaders of the Baha'i faith. And there was a number of like teachers at that time period who showed up. And then they taught people, and during World War II, I think, Gandhi was fasting, and there was this deep sense of, okay, there's a different way to change. And again, there was violence and he was killed. And but that was Pluto out of bounds in that violent tyranny place. So what we get to do now is take all of those visionaries and have this be a very different kind of revolution. And I think the kind of change we have to do inside ourselves is pretty tremendous. It's pretty big because of how much trauma there's been. All of us have traumatic history. I mean, we're just part of what's been happening is just announcing it, saying, women have been being raped and, Black people have been treated so horribly. And we're starting to kind of see how these things that have been kind of invisible or glossed over, we first have to see them before we can create the change. And then we have to figure out how to create the change without being the same old violent, let's do what we did in the Revolutionary War, which isn't the way we want to go through this next time period. We don't want to pull out guns and sneak attacks and then just wear out the British until they're like, okay, take your land, we're just done with you. That's not what we're seeing. That's not this next revolution. This next revolution wants to be more cohesive. It's a revolution to end all revolutions. It's not even the right word, revolution. We don't even have a word for it right now. It's going to be much more of a unity consciousness coming in, and a whole different way of living on the planet, including how we connect with nature and how we connect with each other, how we are in relationship. We can just see so much breaking down. The binary systems, our bodies are binary, like our non-binary, we're moving out of these in all these different ways, and they're all just getting us ready. We're resistant to some of it, and some of it we're angry about, and that's the stuff we have to work on. Because this way that our bodies are shifting, they're adapting to this new energy. And some of us will just realize that it's just going to be a lot easier to work at all this from the other side. Like I really feel like Carol, it's like, you know what, my being, my body, I don't want to be here for this stage. I'm going to do my work on the other side, and recognizing that that's going to be a path for a lot of people, and us all working to support other people in making that transition, not in this crazy way that we've done where you die in the hospital of something that's horrific, but in a way where we can consciously pass, where we can be supported and loved as we pass on in an intentional way. Same with, I think, the psychedelic movement. Like these are coming here and becoming more and more available because we need these. We need, for a lot of people, we're just going to need a sudden explosion of, oh, I get it. When we think about how many people are so stuck and so unable to access these higher qualities, these psychedelics and these new healing forms are coming in so that these transitions can happen really rapidly, so you don't have to live in an ashram for 20 years, 4 years, or do therapy for 20 years. You're going to have more immediate access, and the more people that do it, the better it is, because you'll just have people around you that are going, yeah, I got you, I see you, you're not crazy. So I think this is, happening rapidly. I forget the question. Oh, the election, that's where I went from the election. Yeah, yeah,
So that's why people like Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. who like, they want to protect children, they want to protect our food system, and they want to pour into regenerative agriculture. It's just not.
yeah. So, oh, I know where I was going. At one point, I was like, a lot of these leaders like are born during World War II, right? Biden, Trump, and Yahoo, and these, they were born during World War II. I think we're gonna skip a couple of generations, and the next leaders are gonna be the people born in the 1980s. And this is where, so it's not time for them, but it will all of a sudden be time, and we'll just see that, oh, yeah, we're skipping over the 60-year-olds. Maybe skipping over the 50-year-olds, and we're just going right to the 30-year-olds, or how old, I don't know, 1987 seems like it was yesterday to me, but they're probably like adults now. They're 40s now. How did that happen? I mean. So, yeah,
What the East-West binary?
um. So she's asking about the East-West binary. I think there's such a powerful shift that happened in the 1860s that the spiritual teachers of India started to come to the United States, and the teachers of the Middle East were coming here, and vice versa. There was one of the things that happened in the 1860s, it was the Suez Canal. So watching stuff happen around the Suez Canal is really interesting because we can track that whole thing from division time. But also transportation is completely radically shifting at that time. And people were starting to travel, and it wasn't, you weren't walking for miles in the desert, to get somewhere. You were taking trains. There was a transcontinental railroad that was created in the 1860s, and the Orient Express was around that time period. So then there's all these people traveling and getting information and having access to other ways of thinking. And so in the so before World War II, there was, I think it was Vivekananda who came and spoke at the conference in Chicago and started really bringing out meditation and yoga. That happened really quickly. So, and then in the 1980s was another time period of really feeling like the East-West, the merging of these different spiritual paths. And even though the 1960s were big for that, but I think 1960s and 70s was just kind of starting it. In the 1980s was when so many of us were like, oh yeah, the harmonic convergence and, the meditation, yoga, these different more Eastern paths, even Vedic astrology, we can track from the 1980s when Chakrapani Lal came over and started teaching Vedic astrology in the United States. So I think there's like a real genuine merging that happens in the time coming up. We can kind of track.
Including China?
Yeah, including China, yeah. China, I think they started this cycle. It was the Taiping Rebellion, but it was also the Opium Wars had just kind of concluded. And the Opium Wars were pretty much the drug lords of Europe just coming in and saying and forcing China to accept opium as a drug. And the emperor died like around 1865, I think, and his son was 5 years old, and he came into power, and too young to rule, 5. So, but his mother was Jixi, and Jixi, he was this amazing person. I don't know, people are like, there's controversy about every historical figure, but she started making pacts with the US, this guy, Burlingame. So this diplomat from the US and diplomats from Europe, she started changing the culture. And so it was an open door time period. They started opening the door to trade. So I think it's an interesting beginning to China when they went into such oppression during World War II and Chairman Mao. And then in the 1980s, there was the same kind of revolutions or revolt that was happening in other places, but it was violently quashed at Tiananmen Square. So I think there's an awakening that's happening in China, because it was so violently put down in the 1980s. I'm concerned for how violent it may need to be during this time period. Whereas with Russia, I feel like I have a lot of hope for Russia because all of that dismantling that Gorbachev did in the 1980s really set the stage for these people to be able to allow change. And a lot of those revolutions happened really peacefully. So I think they're going to get super tired of Putin and he's going to be out and they're going to be ready to restructure in a way that they already have in their bones, you know, and in a way that we don't have here. We've been so comfortable this whole cycle. We don't, you know, we just have a few things happen and we're like, you know, our adrenal glands are on override. So I think it's going to be a little harder, maybe not physically for us here, but emotionally for us to like adapt to, oh, you know, we may not have this kind of government, or we may not have, you know, these kind of infrastructures where you take a society like Russia who's been like, yeah, we know what it's like to live without food. Or I think we'll be looking at places like Cuba and other places that have gone through these dramatic change as like beacons for us as, okay, this is the pathway that we've been forging for how to grow food organically, how long it takes to get the soil so that it can grow food. It takes 3 years. You know, they like studied all this, they focused on medicine. And not that this is a good government in some ways, but the role model, not of the governments, but of the people and what the people have been doing in these places, because people are good and difficult everywhere. There's not like a place where, oh, the people in Saudi Arabia are bad people. It's like the people themselves are dealing with the karmas of the place in which they were born, and the karmas of the history, and the karmas of the governments in which they are given. And so I think the people in Russia are just have dealt with a lot, and I think that will be really interesting to see. And again, that war is just, unfortunately, just the timing. It's almost like Putin knew, if I do this now, it could succeed. If I wait 3 years, no way. And that's kind of what I see from there.
So
Yeah,
when you're saying that,
Ukraine, yes. I think it's really interesting, its placement, and its placement kind of almost in alignment with Israel, and this kind of place where there's all this shift that's happening. I think it's really interesting that these countries in Eastern Europe that went through the fall of the Soviet Union and moved into their own countries are the ones that are receiving the refugees from Ukraine and are opening their doorways for it, like Poland. And I think that they're creating an example for how to open to this refugee shift and climate refugees, which will be a bigger part of the process coming up as well. So again, it feels like this year, I'm like watching more than saying, you know, I know it's going to happen there, but more like, okay, if they can, it depends on how people hold out, what the leaders decide to do, if they decide to pull back a little bit so that there's still enough energy to turn the tide there, or if they move into more just loss and destruction and can't come back from it. That has happened. One time when Pluto went out of bounds, it was 1177 BCE, like many long time ago, but we were in very similar worlds as today. It was a global society, there was world trade organizations, there was a hub, and that went into collapse. Now, collapse doesn't necessarily mean everything is destroyed, all, it's like almost the same number of people were still living. But they just figured out how to live off the grid, out of the guise of these imperial organizations. I mean, maybe you're looking at, right? Did I just say that right? I mean, a lot of people died, but it wasn't like this mass kind of calamity. I mean, archaeologists are just starting to figure out what happened at that time. But we know that the civilizations did change at that time. And so we could see these kind of government collapse. But that could create a space for something new to happen. And given that we're in a time unlike any other time, we've never had the internet before, we've never had this ability to communicate simultaneously. We've been in training ourselves to communicate simultaneously such that pretty soon we're just not going to need this stuff. And they're kind of in training us to do it. The more they do it, but the thing is that we'll be able to take that and just use it telepathically versus them controlling, our thoughts or things like that, that I think a lot of people are concerned about, this AI technology and the new kind of webs and gadgets that are coming out. But I think it's been part of laying out a blueprint for unity and for us to be able to, communicate and connect with them. I mean, that's part of the success of some of the Me Too movements and Black Lives Matter is that so many people all over the world could know this was happening, and instantly within a day, there could be massive demonstrations all over the world. And that could very well be a very different thing that has never happened before. So, yeah. Yeah, it's usually just really dark and hard right before it changes. It was really dark and hard in the Reformation. I mean, those guys, Zwingli got killed. It wasn't like all this peaceful demonstration. There was like the Crusades right before 1291 were particularly brutal. It's like there's this darkness that happens right before the shift happens. And then all of a sudden, within a year, done. No more Crusades. The Catholic Church was like, all right, you're going to form other religions. We're done like torturing you. I mean, they kept on torturing for a while, but it was like, yeah, all right, we give in. And there is this kind of possibility for that. And particularly when we're seeing all these leaders in their 80s. I mean, it's not hard to imagine somebody who's 85 years old is going to pass away. It's not weird. Or, yeah, I don't know what Trump is living on. I don't know what's sustaining him to have so much energy, but I think it's really powerful to watch how the response of the government, we're testing our checks and balances right now in a big way. And I think that's profound to have us really be like, all right, what's this government really made of? Let's see, what's the line that we actually draw? So I think that'll be particularly interesting this year to see, we're testing the boundaries, and it could be that it's amazing. It could be like success in terms of recognizing that there's been a breach. Just like Brazil has shifted. They're showing an example where not quite as we didn't do it quite as well as them. They were like, oh yeah, you can't do an insurrection. We're done with that. Somehow we're like, oh, maybe. But we'll see this year. I think these issues are gonna be spoken, brought about, brought up. I think that's Medusa saying, yeah, we're gonna shake things up. This is not
Is part of that like truth being told, like part of astrologically these times where things that have been kept from us, kind of like a parent, these older generations, we don't need to know that, like
exactly.
that's been kept, like it's not important for you to know, or we're controlling it.
Don't look at the man behind the curtain. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is that time where we're seeing what's really been going on. I mean, we're all learning a tremendous amount of history, right? I know I'm not the only one. We're all like kind of figuring out how things started. We're starting to understand our structures more, our government more. I think we're all like getting some really good lessons about what the Supreme Court does, what other justice systems do. I think that, yeah, that awakening. And I think that one of the images I work with is like, the dragon is dying, and as it's dying, it's screaming and it's wailing, and then it's dead. And
The year of the dragon.
yeah. Yeah, Year of the Wood Dragon. So, yeah, watching the dragon kind of scream and yell and still be alive and be, maybe it's some of its most destructive, but it's right before it's about to die. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna end on that note. Is that a weird note to end on? It's really good to be back with everyone and be here. I think this is gonna grow and grow and grow in terms of just people gathering, getting together, and something is shifted. Yeah, well, thank you.